Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom, take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. By Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the t:slim X2 insulin pump. And by Real Good Foods, real food you feel good about eating.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, Dexcom's CEO, Kevin Sayer, shares lots of news from the recent ADA scientific sessions, and he talks about a new G6 transmitter they're working on.
Our testing is the Bluetooth range is much stronger, and it does have more memory. It has a stronger processor. It's capable of more things. We will certainly continue to do upgrades to G6. It won't just be the transmitter, but you'll see a series of upgrades over the next year.
Kevin also shares news about Dexcom's role with current hybrid closed loops, answers your questions about Medicare and updates to follow, and touches on when we might see the G7 and when we'll stop seeing the G4. In our Community Connection, a new resource to help you find the best pump, CGM, and other diabetes tech for you. And Tell Me Something Good is something that is really good. This may benefit the entire diabetes community. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to Diabetes Connections. I'm your host, Stacey Sims. So glad to have you along. Didn't you feel like the news was coming fast and furious out of the American Diabetes Association scientific sessions last weekend and into last week? So we're catching up on some of that now, and I hope you are in the Facebook group because we were able to post a lot of the information there. One of these days, I'm going to go to ADA and love to kind of report from there as well. But in the meantime, we're passing along lots of great reporting from other sources. Have already posted a lot of that in the group and will continue to do so on social media. And we'll be talking to a lot of the players as the summer goes on. So I'm really excited about that. Are you signed up for the newsletter? If you are, did you get it? Did you see the extra that came through? I'm so excited about this. I've been hinting around for a while, but the Diabetes Connections extras are going out. They have gone out. And if you sign up, you will get it immediately if you sign up for the newsletter. So what is an extra? These are transcriptions. It's going to be once a month to start. These are the extra episodes that we've been doing once a month. The end of every month, the very last show of each month is an in-depth look at one topic. What is an insulin pump? How does insulin work? What are ketones? So we're going to be transcribing those, sending them out once a month, as well as some evergreen topics. Now, the first one that went out was one of those evergreens. This is all about getting diabetes organized. It's such a great episode, not because of me, but because of certified diabetes educator Susan Weiner. And she goes through how to get organized, everything from supplies to paperwork. She is amazing. So every month, if you subscribe, this is going to go out on the second Thursday each month and to new subscribers when they sign up. And when you sign up, if you're new, you're going to start with that month's extra. So you need to sign up before July 15th, thereabouts, to get diabetes organized. I'd love to know what you think of this. People have been asking me for transcriptions since we started the show 4 years ago, and I've been reluctant for a number of reasons. First of all, the news changes a lot in our community. So I wanted to be very deliberate about what transcriptions I gave, only because I wanted them to be useful. I didn't want them to be stale and old news. But I'm curious, too, are you reading these? Do you want more? Let me know. I'm very excited about it. I think once a month is right, but, you tell me. Hey, I also want to let you know before we jump in with Dexcom, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the partnership between JDRF and Texas Roadhouse restaurants, and that deadline is coming up. You only have through June 30th, and here's how this works. If you purchase a Texas Roadhouse gift card online, if you're not familiar, this is a steak restaurant, 10% of the proceeds will go to JDRF. Now, you can't walk into the restaurant and do this, is my understanding. You have to do it online. I will put a link in the show notes and in the Facebook group and make it very easy for you. Please check it out. It's a really easy way to raise some money for JDRF, Texas Roadhouse online. And if you just go to their website under gift cards, you can see the JDRF logo there. But again, I'll link it up. All right, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And when you have a toddler diagnosed with type 1 like we did, You hear rumblings for a long time about the teen years, but when it hit us at full force a little early, I was really glad we had the Dexcom. Benny's insulin needs started going way up around age 11, and he has grown. He's probably grown 8 inches in the last 3.5 years. He's over 5'10". And along with the hormone swings, I can't imagine managing diabetes during this time without the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system. We can react more quickly to highs and lows, see the trends, adjust the dosing with advice from our endo. I know using the Dexcom G6 has helped improve Benny's A1C and overall health. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. A lot of news came out of the recent ADA Scientific Sessions Conference, and Dexcom was part of a lot of the announcements. And now, as you just heard, as I read the commercial, Dexcom is a sponsor of this show. If you're new to the program, it may seem kind of strange. How can I talk to them and ask them hard questions if they're a sponsor of the show? But they do not tell me what to ask. They are not paying for this interview. They don't get a list of questions in advance. I do appreciate them understanding that distinction. And, for always coming back on, I'll link up our past episodes with lots of different people from Dexcom, lots of higher ups, and they always come back even after some tougher questions. And I'll be honest with you, that's not always the case. So if you're a longtime listener, I know you kind of understand how we do this. If you're new, I hope I prove to you that this is a news interview with Dexcom and not a commercial. So let's get to it. Here is my discussion with Dexcom CEO, Kevin Sayer. Kevin, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me after a really busy couple of days. Now, it seems to me that Dexcom didn't have, a standalone breakout news release or study from this session, but you were kind of in the middle of everything. Before we get to specific questions, can you give me your takeaway from ADA this year?
It was a fabulous meeting for Dexcom, and we were in the middle of everything. One of the questions I've been asked in a couple of interviews is what's changed at these shows for you, because I've been at the ADA for a number of years, and what's changed the most is CGM is at the center of everything. And for us, I think the news of this show is the interoperability of the system that we built, the reliability of the Gen 6 system in driving all of these decisions and these tools to help people better manage their condition. For me personally, in my meetings with physicians and with Dexcom users, the most gratifying thing, as you know, I ask everybody, tell me what you're experiencing, tell me what you're doing. And with the G6 product, I got nothing but wows. And that makes you feel pretty good.
Well, let's go through some of those studies and news releases and research that came out at ADA. And then we can ask I have all these questions I always like to ask you. But let's start with one that talked about CGM helping older adults with type 1 diabetes. This is not a group that gets a lot of attention, but this was people with type 1 above the age of 60. And the results were great. They spent a lot less time in hypoglycemia and more than 2 hours per day in range. It just sounds like good news all around, Kevin.
It's wonderful news. I think the Medicare approval that we got a couple of years ago has led to a wonderful new use of the technology in a group that greatly benefits from it. Particularly, Stacey, and again, I'll go back to my experience at Dexcom. The notes I get from seniors are fabulous. They are doing very, very well with the product, and it eliminates a lot of misconceptions. Back in the old days, people would, and I say old days, 4 or 5 years ago, well, we can't put CGM on these people. They won't understand the data, and we really can't put it on kids because they don't know it. And we just go round and round about all the places where CGM would be overwhelming. CGM's not overwhelming. It's absolutely essential. And our senior population across the board is doing wonderfully. So I could have told you without a study, based on what we hear, that this was going to be wonderful data. And it's nice to verify it, because when Medicare makes a decision to cover something, it's always nice to look back and say, wow, we did something good. We did something that is better. We did something that will lead to better outcomes over time. So all around, we felt that study supported a number of good things happening. in the diabetes community.
I do have to ask, though, so this WISDOM study, it was WISDM, and like everything we'll talk about here, I will link it up in the show notes, and you can go back and look and read these things for yourselves. But it was with the Dexcom G5. As you mentioned, Medicare approval has come for G6, but my understanding is that it hasn't yet started shipping. Can you speak to that a little bit? It's supposed to be later this year. Is that still in the timeline?
Yeah, it is later this year, and to describe it best, we've had supply constraints, and we did not want to jump into the Medicare population and then get in a situation where we are challenged to supply our current patients and our Medicare patients. G6 has been a blockbuster product for us, and we moved the launch up, as I've said in numerous public statements, significantly on our time frame because we got a very, very early approval. And since then, we've been scrambling to keep up with demand as we looked at our capacity and the things that we could do. And we have a lot of infrastructure that's been scheduled to come online for a long time with G6 that's now coming up. We're working through all these things. And when we launch in Medicare, we want to be able to convert them all. We want to be able to say, if you want G6, you have it now. And so we have pushed that time frame out for two reasons. A, to make sure we don't get into a situation where we're picking and choosing, and B, we don't want to take away from the other patient base as well. It's probably the least happy thing I've done here and been involved with in several years, because G6 for the Medicare patients is also going to be game-changing.
And there are a lot of people waiting for it, as I'm sure you know. But you mentioned the infrastructure ramping up. Are you feeling good about that for the end of the year? I know you never can really pin down those timelines, but give me something on that.
I'm feeling very good about it. We've invested a lot of money and really are moving quickly, as quick as we can. Something that's lost on many people, Dexcom launched our first product in 2006, and it took us 10 years to get to our first $500 million in revenues. It took us 2 years after that to get over $1 billion.
Right.
And that kind of growth looks nice, and it is nice, and it validates the technology. That's hard. And so we have been doing everything we can to keep up. What we've learned is some of the little things that we did to go from $50 million to $80 million in revenue. Well, that was good when we were that size. We've got to think bigger and do more and invest more capital. And so we are doing that. We have a lot of automation coming in manufacturing that will enable us to go faster. We have new suppliers coming online and more suppliers coming online to get more product. And we feel very good about where we are with G6. And I guess the other thing I can tell you is there are a lot of lessons learned as we look at our future technologies. For example, if we get that early approval, again, next time, we probably wouldn't go immediately. We would stick with our plan and build up our inventories and go rather than live the way that we've lived. But we always try and do what's right for patients, and we always have, and that was how we made that decision. The next time when we make that decision, we'll probably think a little bit different and make sure we have everything lined up, because that is also important for patients as well. And there are trade-offs. I wouldn't do it any different because of the reception of G6, and I wouldn't do any different because it's important as a company that we learn to get better, and we are. So both those things have been achieved, and we'll be better as we go forward. That's about all I can say.
Right. Let's talk about another thing that came out of ADA, and that is your official partnership with Tidepool. We've done a lot of shows on Tidepool. We've got a lot of information about Loop. I'm not going to go through everything about that again here, but I wanted to ask you, I think a lot of people just kind of assumed you had already partnered with Tidepool. Can you talk to me about why that was important for you and what it means going forward? And if you could also talk a little bit about ICGM.
Sure. Let me start with ICGM, because that affects us directly and our business. And I think we had this discussion earlier. When we originally set out to get the Gen 6 system approved, we were going to file it in our typical manner as a PMA product. We had a lot of thoughts about how robust the system could be. We'd had numerous discussions with the FDA. When we sat down to put a plan together very much interactively, the FDA encouraged us to work on creating a new category of product that we call ICGM, so these devices could be interconnected with other systems. And what the FDA did, and I applaud them for this, is they set standards around which CGMs need to perform to be able to be connected within the ecostructure, the diabetes ecostructure. So with our G6 system, with its performance, and it's not just MARD that we've talked about over and over again, but it's performance within various ranges of glucose levels. It's reliability. It's making sure that the outliers are kept at a minimum. There are a lot of criteria to this. The systems have to be interconnected. You have to be able to connect to other systems.
Right back to Kevin in just a moment, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneTouch, and handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The OneTouch Vario Flex Meter seamlessly syncs with the free OneTouch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the OneTouch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, OneTouch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the OneTouch Vario Flex Meter and OneTouch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneTouch logo. Now back to Kevin Sayer talking about interoperability.
By creating these standards, what the FDA has done is create a classification of products to whereby this science has existed in our community for a long time. The researchers who have developed algorithms that they've spent much money on with research, but a lot of these products have never been commercialized. There's going to be an easier path on the CGM side because they can connect right to G6. The best example was the very rapid approval of the Tandem product, the Basal IQ product, with G6. G6 had barely been on the market, and Tandem got approval to run that system on G6 because we have an interconnected iCGM. So when there is a new algorithm that can drive automated insulin delivery, if they can connect to the Dexcom G6 on the sensor side, that regulatory path has become much simpler for the other technologies involved in the system. And in our industry, it is our hope and our belief, and based on our discussions with the FDA, that's still where we are, that if you want to be an iCGM, you can, but you're going to have an extremely strong product, and you're going to have to be able to meet those accuracy criteria. They were very clear with us as we've spoken with them that these things aren't going to move, that here's how we believe these systems have to work. You know, our engineers, after we got iCGM, we all cheered. And then the engineers started looking at it, and they came back and said, do we have to meet this every time? Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. And I think that's good for patients. It's good for businesses. It's good for all of us. And so they've set the bar. With respect to Tide Pool and Loop, I'll take both of those together. One of the big stories at this meeting was Tide Pool announcing what they're trying to do. These guys have been very innovative and creative, and they've been out there in the diabetes community for a very long time. The Tide Pool team had met with FDA and said, you know, all these systems are out here. Patients really should have the right to choose to use them in a regulated manner, and FDA wants patients to be safe if they're going to choose to use these things. So there's a path that's being developed and been provided for these tools to be commercialized for patients to use. Dexcom with an iCGM can work right into the system, and the patients using Loop software, as you know, have long been pairing with Dexcom technology. What we did, and this was really as much a matter of timing as anything else, we had to work through the arrangements of contractually what this is going to look like for us. While this makes a lot of common sense and it looks very simple on the outside, there's a lot of intricacies in interoperability and working with other companies to make sure that our technology is used in the manner that we want it to be used, that our partners have freedom to operate the way that they want to. It took us a bit of time to paper the arrangement with Tidepool. I've been very supportive of this personally for a long time, as has most of our team. On the Loop side, again, there's mixed buckets here. The FDA put a letter out, about a month ago saying, look, these systems are not approved. Be careful. On the other hand, at the show, I can't tell you how many people running Loop came running up to me, telling me I'm on Loop and I'm doing very well.
I just need you to clarify something. I'm just a little confused by that, because when I look at your agreement with Tidepool, or what the Tidepool press release says, it says, this means the community will be able to pair the Tidepool Loop app with the Dexcom G6 and the pumps that Tidepool is working with so far, Omnipod and Medtronic, which is big. Okay. So you're talking about when it is FDA approved. Okay.
Yes. And what the FDA is doing with Tidepool, and again, this is new ground, they're coming up with a manner to whereby the algorithm and the automated insulin delivery software and infrastructure that they are developing can run on numerous pump platforms and pair with an ICGM. And if and when there are other ICGMs, my belief, more than likely, Tidepool will add them to that infrastructure as well. They are very much an open architecture inclusive group. Right now, we are the only ICGM out there, and so they are working with us. So yeah, it will pair with a number of pumps. Certainly, Insulet has been working with them. Insulet's one of our pump partners. All this goes as is on paper. Then literally, theoretically, if you're an Insulet pump user 3 or 4 years from now, and I'm using 3 or 4 years just to be conservative, you could say, I've got my Dexcom sensor, my Insulet pump, and I can either use Horizon's algorithm to run my system, or I can use Tidepool's. I'll pick which one I think would give me the best opportunity. An interoperability environment that FDA has long been working towards with the belief that patients should have choice. And this is a big step and an important step in that world.
I want to ask you a couple more questions about the G6, if I could. And this is something that comes up a lot. When I talked to the CTO of Dexcom, Jake Leach, earlier this year, we talked about it, and he said you all were working on it. I mean, the G6 is terrific. We're very fortunate. My son is 14. As my listeners know, and as you probably remember, he uses the Tandem pump, so he uses the Basal IQ software. It all works beautifully for us, and we get the full 10 days out of the sensors. But I'm in a local Facebook group. I'm in a lot of other groups. I talk to a lot of people through the podcast, and there are a lot of people who do not have sensors that last for 10 days. I'm curious if you could talk about, I know you all know this, what you're trying to do to make the sensors last the full 10 days, because I'm sure you don't want to be replacing them all the time, just as we don't want to be calling them in.
No, we don't. We continue to work on the technology to make it more robust. In simple terms, the reason many of them shut off before 10 days is the way the algorithm is designed based on the ICGM standards. We predicted the sensor would not be performing to the accuracy levels that the FDA has deemed that we have to meet to be in this category, so the way we designed it was to shut the sensor off when certain criteria are met. That being said, through algorithm changes, through possible system changes or materials changes within the boundaries and specifications we've established, we believe that we can do things to eliminate some of those incidences. And we will continue to work to make that better. I can also tell you that physiology in this market and with these products, for lack of a better word, it sucks. We cannot predict how every individual body is going to react to our CGM inside of it. And physiology frequently is a factor in all this. I think, again, as I look to the future over time and things become more interactive or more individualized, that these things will also continue to be reduced. As we look at our future generations of sensors, we're now learning from the readings of G6 to make those more substantial and more reliable. It is something that we're working on.
I just want to make sure I heard you right. Did you say physiology sucks?
Yeah, because everybody's not the same. If we were all the same, it would be wonderful, but we're not. Everybody is different. And the best example is when I talk to parents who have 2 children with type 1 diabetes, and the story is almost always the same. I've got child number 1 who we can manage, who is smooth, and I got everything figured out. And I can see child number 2 and child number 1 the same thing, and child number 2 is going to spike to 400, and there's not a thing I can do.
Yeah.
And so we are all different, and we try and make these systems as robust as we possibly can. But there's always going to be things that we just can't measure with every single patient. And we try and make bench tests to emulate these things. We have very robust bench testing where we try and predict, okay, if this what happens in a group, what is causing that? We work on it all the time. Yeah, if we could all be the same, if I could just put my request in, if everyone could be exactly the same, we could make them a lot better.
That would work. All right, I have a bunch of questions from listeners. I'm going to try to go through them quickly. You take as long as you want to answer them, but I have a feeling they may not take that long to answer. So Kate wants to know, how long until you launch G6 in Canada? Or it was approved not too long ago.
That's on the map for later this year. I do not have a specific date today. But we will get G6 up in Canada this year, is our plan.
Jillian asks, in rolling out the G7, and I'll add, just for future iterations of Dexcom, are there plans to reduce the environmental footprint of the sensor applicator?
And I can answer that with a resounding yes.
That is
we
good
are
news.
making the applicator smaller.
That's great, because I'll tell you what, I know it's not more plastic than the G5 when you look at the whole thing together, but it feels like it, and I just wish we could recycle everything.
It looks like a very elegant device that we should use for a year.
Yes.
And unfortunately, with the needle and the way the action works, and you can't reuse needles, it's just a situation where we are. And our G7 insertion system has many fewer parts and is much smaller, and we will address that. So, yes.
I'm sorry. I feel like this is like the Android question last year that I kept asking about. Watch, direct to Apple Watch. Is that still in the works for this year?
It is in the works. It is in testing. We're working on filing and getting this thing perfected. Direct to watch is much more complicated than we had originally imagined, and we are rolling that out. I can't tell you if it's end of this year or early next year. A lot of it depends upon our hardware plans. There's a new transmitter, literally a new physical transmitter that one will have to go direct to watch. And we want to make sure that new transmitter is the transmitter of use for our patients in the field. So I'll get back to the G6 launch. If we say direct to watch and all of your transmitters can't go direct to watch, then we're in the position of the phones ringing off the hook. So we're planning this to whereby it'll be seamless and nobody will know.
Oh, that's interesting, because it'll be the same transmitter for everyone, but just eventually you'll get a new transmitter and it'll go directly to watch. It's not as though you'd have to request a special transmitter, in other words. No,
we want all the transmitters to be able to do it, but the current one will not. And we've worked on the firmware and the architecture of our next generation transmitter to whereby it will. And we've got that transmitter approved. We're getting the firmware finalized to do that, and we will quietly start releasing it into the field, and then one day you'll all wake up. And we will have direct to watch, but we want to do this in an organized manner.
Can I ask if there are any other we'll wake up and just have it updates coming on that transmitter?
Well, the new transmitter that we are launching, we've talked about it much with our investors, is new electronics that we've spent years developing. One of the features, our testing is the Bluetooth range is much stronger, and it does have more memory. It has a stronger processor. It's capable of more things. We will certainly continue to do upgrades to G6. It won't just be the transmitter, but you'll see a series of upgrades over the next year that we think will definitely help the community and make G6 a better product.
All right, several questions from parents about the Follow app, but my favorite is from Janet, and Janet writes, make it break through the do not disturb so I can be alerted, but not also receive texts at 4 a.m. from old freaking Navy. So Janet would really like to make sure that Dexcom alerts can break through the followers do not disturb. Can you speak to that? I'm not all that familiar with do not disturb. I should probably use it on my phone, but I don't.
I'm not familiar with do not disturb either, but I can speak to this whole community and the share follow thing. I was asked in one of my interviews at 88, have you done anything where there was unintended consequences? And I would say share follow is one of those things. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but as I talk with young people, there's this whole new thing about rules of engagement on how mom and dad or whoever can interact with me on share and follow. And there are many, many thoughts as to what we should have the system override and have the system not. I think you'll remember we had to get permission and work very closely with Apple to override the mute button with the G6 app to make sure that alerts came through the mute button. We thought we were doing something wonderful, and 80% of our patients thought we had. The other 20 wanted to kill us. Mm-hmm. And the best letter I got was from one patient. I'm an attorney. I wear my product. I silence my phone when I'm in court so I can be taken credible. I would never want my phone to make noise. And now with these alerts and you overriding the mute button, stand up and this thing starts making noise. Turn it off.
Yeah.
And so the law of unintended consequences, as we learn things about this and what patients want, has been really interesting for us. You know what? That's something I can talk to the team about. And that's certainly something we could work with and talk with Apple about. They've been a wonderful partner, and we're getting much better on the Android front, too.
Great. Well, I would say, I have about 4 or 5 other follow questions here that we've asked before, talking about different times for when alarms go off. And I'm not going to go through them all, but if you are going to look at that, I know you've made some improvements to follow more followers, things like that. I would really urge you, and maybe you're already doing this, to talk to parents, because when you use the app we've been using Dexcom for more than 5 years now, you really kind of learn what's helpful. Things like having the transmitter number in the follow app, something simple like that. And I wonder, too, if you could just have a pediatric switch that the user could set. And maybe even if you need it, you get it from the doctor and they say, yes, this is a pediatric patient. I don't know. But I think that there's a lot of, as I said, I'm not going to go through all the questions and suggestions, but there are a lot here.
In fairness, we do have focus groups on the Follow app. One of the most common things that I hear is parents want insulin data in the Follow app. We want insulin data in the G6 app. We're preparing a future app launch whereby we can receive insulin data from Bluetooth interface with either our pump partners or from the Bluetooth pens that will be out on the market over the next 12 months.
Well, I'm sure that people are using off-label apps and secondary apps and developing their own stuff to do this. And I think most of us would really prefer to be able to just click it and use Dexcom.
And so would we, and that gets back to being regulated. But the other piece of this, Stacey, and it's important for our listeners to know, when we line up what to do you know how hard it is here to decide what to do next? Because every single thing that we look at, we want to do. Because it would make life easier and better for some segment of our patients. And we have to look at and prioritize what is the best next step for our community. I gave you the best example. Follow had not had a refresh for a long time until we just did the recent refresh on the Follow app. We probably should have addressed Follow much sooner. But with G5 and connectivity and then moving to G6 and the things we were working on to get the basic system working and getting to the phone, we took care of the direct user interface more than we took care of the Follow site and Android, your question from last year. And so we sit and we have to make tough choices all the time.
Let's just revisit ADA quickly. As I mentioned, and we've talked about it a little bit throughout, Tandem's Control IQ was put out for the results of some of their studies on that. Omnipod had some studies. These are companies and pump companies that you're partnering with at Dexcom. And the results were really, they're just phenomenal when you're looking at these hybrid closed loops. I'm just going to ask you, can you give us your reaction to seeing not only, Omnipod had great time in range and they went down to 2 years old, but Tandem also had this very interesting little tidbit that nobody dropped out of their study, which the researchers apparently thought was absolutely amazing, not just researchers at Tandem, but I saw a lot of reactions on social media that doesn't generally happen. Can you just speak a little bit to these hybrid closed loop studies?
These studies are something I've waited for a very, very long time. We signed our first agreement with Insulet when I was a board member in 2007. And we still don't have an integrated product. And we still like each other. And we still work together. I can't wait for that Horizon product offering to be out there for patients. And the same thing with Tandem Control IQ. And Tandem Control IQ is near and dear to us because, as listeners know, we acquired Type 0, the algorithm behind Control IQ. And the things that are interesting, and I'm not as familiar with the Insulet data. I was in a lot of interview rooms when I was back at ADA. I'm more familiar with the Tandem data. Some of the things that were noteworthy to me, the patients didn't drop out. The other thing is the system ran all the time, that the patients weren't told every 2-3 hours, you're on your own now. I think it was over 90% of the time the system was running and controlling the patients, thereby reducing the tough decisions everybody has to make all the time. Excellent control at night. And the key for any product is, do people stay on and use it? And as we look at the payer world, as we look at people paying for these systems over time, I assure you, and I know firsthand because I've been in meetings, one of the biggest concerns is I'm going to spend all this money and you're not going to use it. Well, what that Tandem data said is, please buy the system for me because I will stay on it and I will use it and I will be in good control. And these are the kinds of outcomes We need to drive the cause forward. I think that data was interesting. And like I said, I did not get into Insulet's data. I was not at that seminar. Actually, I'm getting briefed on that right after I hang up the phone. But I did talk with enough Insulet people to hear the enthusiasm and pride in their voices. I think this will be a wonderful system, too. And there's two great choices. And then on top of that, the interoperability discussion we just had about Tidepool, then patients can have even more choices. And I know where the software goes. Over time, you have hybrid closed loop. Then ultimately, you have more of a closed loop system. And then you ask, what are the trade-offs of making decisions versus not having to make decisions? This is going to be really fun. And the technology is advancing at a very rapid pace. And with a sensor behind it that is accurate enough to keep patients safe and a good enough experience to whereby they're not having the troubles they've had with systems in the past, I think this technology will be wonderful. And it won't just be for the hybrid closed-loop pump interfaces. These algorithms in this software and these discoveries that are being developed are going to help those who choose to use a pen as well. Decision support tools will really become a very large part of our industry. And what they will enable patients to do is say, the way I want to interact with my diabetes is like this, and here's how I can be the most healthy. And it's our goal at Dexcom to make sure we have the tools to enable patients to interact the way they want to.
One more question. I know we've got a lot going on here, but it just occurred to me, when you're thinking about the G6 and then the G7, two-part question here. How much longer are we going to see the earlier iterations available? I mean, are there any G4 still out there? How much longer will you be making and shipping G5? Yeah, okay. And then I'll let you talk about G7. When is that coming?
Okay, let's go with the earlier iterations. There actually are G4s out there. I can give you a couple of examples. We have Animas pumpers, particularly in Europe and some in the U.S., who still use G4 that displays on their Animas pump. We've continued to support those patients. And our professional product, the product used in the physician's office, we never upgraded from G4 to G5, and we haven't moved it to G6 yet because we're developing an entirely new software interaction for the physician CGM. We call it G6 Pro. That's scheduled to be launched on our timelines in early 2021. Then we will discontinue G4 in the physician's office, and there will be a time frame upon which we get rid of all of the G4s. But G4, for example, given the Japanese regulatory system, it took us a while to get to Japan. G4 was the first product we had approved. We are now working on moving straight to G6 in Japan. That will take a little bit of time. With respect to G5, there's a couple reasons we've kept that going as well. A, the Medicare patients, who we've continued to sell that to. And there are geographies in Europe where we have not launched G6 yet, simply because of the supply constraints and the infrastructure we need to build out that I described to you earlier in the phone call. And as G6 takes over everywhere, we will start phasing out G5. We have never been very good at phasing things out here. And again, it gets back to the voice of the patient in our ears. I've met G4 users who say, I don't want to go to a phone, and I don't want to give up my little receiver. I would love for them to go to their phones and give up their receivers.
Yeah.
And eventually we will force that. But we have not done that yet. G7, G7 is a product. The electronics we developed jointly in our agreement with Verily, which is Google's healthcare arm, and the technology is wonderful. It is smaller. It is all disposable. It is smaller than a quarter on your body. We are definitely shooting for an extended wear period for parents and patients who have their G6 fall off. I can say that does happen to me from time to time, but as I've worn G7s, looking at, just getting the experience, I've never lost one falling off. It is a wonderful product, and the best way I could describe it to the listeners, it's a bigger jump forward than G6 was over G5. It's that big. So when we launch it, we know we're turning on a faucet that I want this now, and we're going to have to make sure we are ready. We are building manufacturing lines for G7 now in San Diego. We are getting ready to build large clean room facilities in Arizona for G7 manufacturing. And we haven't even finished all our G6 scale up, and we're getting ready to build lines and do things for that product. It will launch. There will be two things that control that launch, obviously, FDA and CE mark approval. And this is a completely new product, so this is not going to be a study where we're just saying we've slightly modified G6 and we can go quickly like we can on some things. This will be a large, several hundred patient study with many accuracy points. So the trial will take a long time. The approval process we don't think will. We would expect a U.S. launch in early 2021, maybe a limited launch of some kind, even if we got early approval in the U.S., but very limited in 2020. Because again, lessons learned from G6, we are going to have all the product we need on hand to go. When we go with G7, it's going to be a very big deal, and patients are going to love it. My theme at ADA to everybody when asking about G7, I remind them that we're only a year into G6, and now I'm talking about G7 and getting everybody fired up, and we sometimes forget we've launched a wonderful technology now, and let's celebrate that, and let's get as many patients on that as we can. But when we flip to G7, it's going to go fast.
Well, I really appreciate it. It's a lot of information and a lot of timelines. But Kevin, thank you so much for spending so much time with me and answering all of those questions. I do feel a little bit like the white rabbit sometimes with my clock, asking, when are we coming out? When is this going to happen?
And you don't think I play that role here? I am the worst. I am the absolute worst. So we're very happy with the reception we've had with G6. We can now see the plans we've had in place for years really starting to come to fruition. With our partners having wonderful success, with Insulet and Tandem reporting their results at this conference, with the other interoperable devices that we know are coming, that we're working with, we're really becoming that center, the hub that we'd hoped to be in a number of these things. It's our goal to give patients a wonderful experience and just keep them healthy.
Well, again, thanks so much. Thanks for being accessible, and thanks for doing your best to answer these questions from me and from listeners, Kevin. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information on really so many of the topics we talked about, I will link those up in the show notes. And if you're listening, thinking you've said show notes a couple of times now, what are you talking about? Every podcast app has a little click here for more or details here, and you can click on that and it'll open up and bring you to not only a description of the show, but links to everything we talk about, to time cues, just in case you want to skip around. Lots of good links and info like that. And if you can't find those, just go to diabetes-connections.com. It's a little bit easier, I think, on the website than it is on some of these apps, but that's what I'm talking about. And included in those links will be the Tandem study, the Omnipod study that he was actually going in to hear more about. We will link up lots of information about Tidepool and the Wisdom study, the one that talked specifically about seniors. So tons of info there. I know I didn't get to every single question that you wanted me to ask about Dexcom, but there's only so much time. And I really appreciate you commenting, sending those in, and letting me know what you want to hear about. So thank you for that. And I'm sorry if I didn't ask your specific question. Our community connection this week is DiabetesWise. We'll talk about what that is. Community Connection is brought to you by Tandem, and we started using the t:slim X2 insulin pump from Tandem Diabetes Care in August of 2017. We'd seen it, we loved the look, but I care most about how well it works. And it's fabulous inside and out. Using a touchscreen, there's no more scrolling through menus. As an in-warranty customer, we were able to plug Benny's pump into our home computer and download the new Basal IQ feature. So simple. New features on the same pump from home. To find out more about Benny's pump, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Tandem logo. Something that quietly launched recently, and frankly, it may still be in beta, is DiabetesWise.org. And let me just read from the website here. Our goal is to help you find the right diabetes devices for your lifestyle. DiabetesWise is an initiative from Stanford University School of Medicine and people living with diabetes. It is supported by the Helmsley Charitable Trust. So what's really interesting here is that they take you through step by step to see what would work for you. You take a little quiz, answer a few questions about what you're using, what you'd like, and they help you figure out what would work for you. They also have what they call Wisdom, which is, and again, I'll read from the website, choosing your devices is an incredibly personal decision. Here are the stories of other people's priorities and choices. And then you can filter that wisdom by different topics and hear from other people about what they use, why, what they like, all that good stuff. And they have these guides that will help you choose a pump and choose a sensor by asking specific questions about, what do you want to use it for? What are some of the challenges to your management? It's an amazing resource. As I look at it like this, I really hope it's as useful as it seems to be. And it's hard to believe something like this hasn't been there before. I mean, we've seen a comparison, articles and things like that. And we did a whole show several years ago about what pump should I get. I'm not going to link it up because some of the pumps aren't even in existence anymore and everything's changed so much since I started the show 4 years ago. But this is different. And what's really different about it is this is not put out by a pump or CGM company. As I said right off the bat, this is the Helmsley Charitable Trust and Stanford University School of Medicine. So I'm hoping to talk to them later on. We had talked to folks from the Helmsley Charitable Trust about their CGM Geek Squad, about wanting to help people learn more about how to use CGM. And I wonder if this is one of those pieces, because there's so much great information here. So I'll link this up. Check it out. Let me know what you think. And we'll follow up, hopefully early this summer or later in the fall, with DiabetesWise. Time for Tell Me Something Good. And I'm going to take a quick break from telling your good news stories this week to talk about something that I think is amazingly good news for the entire diabetes community. And that is one of the first studies I remember ever seeing about actually preventing type 1 diabetes, even if it's not permanent, right? Even if it's not preventing it forever. But we're going to get into that in just a moment. Really exciting news. Tell Me Something Good is brought to you by Real Good Foods. Have you tried their new cauliflower crust pizzas? They are so good. They're thin and they're crispy. We really liked the original pizza. Benny's favorite since the beginning of this has been I guess it's called the Supreme Pizza. It's got all the ingredients on it, not just cheese and not just pepperoni. But this is more like a regular crust, like a thin, crispy crust. So yummy. And if you love pasta, check out their Italian entrees. They have a chicken Alfredo and a chicken parm, and they've got 13 carbs in the chicken parm, a little fewer in the chicken Alfredo, and tons of protein in both. Really worth checking out. Now, you can order online or check them out in your grocer freezer. They've got them at Walmart. We go to Harris Teeter is our store. Publix has them. You can use their little store finder on the website or go to the website and kind of pick and choose what you'd like to order. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. Have you participated in TrialNet? We've done a bunch of shows on this, including one that I will link up with a family that was debating whether knowing was better. And they ultimately decided that it was. So let me back up for a minute. What is TrialNet? TrialNet offers screenings for relatives of people with type 1 diabetes, so you can find out your risk of developing it. But they also have clinical studies testing ways to maintain insulin production before and after diagnosis. The goal of TrialNet is to learn about type 1, so ultimately it can be prevented, eradicated, cured, whatever you want to say. And they announced recently that a prevention study was the first to show clinical type 1 diabetes can be delayed for a median of 2 years in children and in adults. And I'm not saying the name of the study because honestly, I can't pronounce the name of the antibody that they used here. Teplizumab? I apologize for that. But what's incredible here is that they were able to delay for an average of 2 years the onset of T1D compared to the placebo group. This was a 7-year study. It was a small study, but 76 participants. But they say the results were found to be highly statistically significant and with great clinical relevance. And this is really interesting to me. One of the researchers said that essentially all close relatives of people with type 1 diabetes who also have multiple antibodies, these are the things they test for in TrialNet, can be considered as having the early asymptomatic form of the disease. Just as we treat the asymptomatic presence of hypertension to prevent a heart attack or a stroke, these findings provide strong evidence we are approaching a future in which we can identify and treat type 1 diabetes long before symptoms occur. Can you even imagine? So we will be talking to TrialNet later this summer. I'd actually already set that up before this study came out, so I am so excited to ask them all of my many questions. But, we have a lot of studies that are just relevant in mice or that, seem to have some hope but don't really do much or identify much. They're kind of pie in the sky. But these are people, in this study, who had type 1 delayed for 2 years. And maybe you're saying, well, big deal, they got it eventually. But 2 years is a long time to hold off an autoimmune disease. If Benny had been diagnosed 2 years later, he probably could have been a lot more articulate about how he felt. It would have made a huge difference. I got to tell you, a not yet 2-year-old is a lot different than an almost 4-year-old developmentally. And even so, that's 2 years that he wouldn't have had to deal with what diabetes does to the body. So I'm excited. I hope you are too. And next week we'll go back to the tell me something goods about the diaversaries and all the meaningful stuff. But this one I just thought really fit the bill. Next week, we are back to the Diabetes Connections Extras. This is all about nutrition. We're going to be talking about more from the ADA scientific sessions, specifically the guidelines about nutrition, where it's much more individualized. And there were more low-carb presentations and things like that. But also, how to read a nutrition label. And I know you just laughed, but I mean things like, do you subtract fiber from carbs? Do you look at soluble fiber? Do you look at different kind of sugar, alcohols? Because I got to tell you, a lot of people do this very different ways. And I want to find out what we should be doing. Obviously, it's different for everybody, but what's best practice? And how can we all help ourselves do what's best for us? So we're going to be talking about that. Benny, at this point, when you're listening, is home from diabetes camp, but he was away last week. So I'm very excited to bring you up to date on how all of that went. And oh my gosh, Friends for Life, we are just juggling a lot of balls in the air over here. So follow along on social because that really is the best real-time way to keep in touch. I love doing the podcast every week, but it's sometimes a little difficult with the time shiftiness of it all. All right. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you, as always, for listening. Thank you so much for sticking with me these 4 years, 233 episodes. Holy cow. Tell a friend about Diabetes Connections. It's really the best way to get the word out about the show so we can share more stories. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.